今天第一位的特邀嘉宾是高志凯教授，他是现任苏州大学的特聘教授，是全球化智库的副主任，同时担任中国能源安全研究院的院长。他曾在外交、法律、投资银行、企业管理等多个领域任职，并积累丰富的经验，包括摩根士丹利、CICC 等机构以及中海油等大型企业的高管职务。他在耶鲁法学院取得法学博士学位，在北京外国语大学获得硕士学位，曾在美国纽约取得律师执业的资格。
Please welcome with a round of applause our first keynote speaker, Professor Victor Gao.
掌声有请主旨演讲嘉宾高志凯先生。
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. This is truly my greatest honor to be here. And let me give my respect to His Excellency Ambassador Huang from China and so many other excellencies and so many other distinguished guests, not only from the Philippines, but also from China, from many other countries. Yes, I did go to Yale, and I got a JD degree from Yale Law School. And I was thinking, going to Yale actually is one of the reasons why I'm so fascinated with the Philippines. Let me tell you why. Because the first governor of the Philippines after 1898 was Mr. Taft. He was from Yale, and he was the first governor of the United States in the Philippines, and he actually laid the foundation for how Philippines developed into a modern society. He played a crucial role in charting out all the rules and the regulations which eventually became the fabric of the Philippines. Later, of course, you may know that Mr. Taft not only became a Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States, he also became a President of the United States. And he is the first President of the United States with education from Yale. So in that sense, whenever I looked at the Philippines, I thought about Mr. Taft, the first US governor of the United States in the Philippines. We all together have 5 presidents of the United States with educational background from Yale, including President Ford in the 1970s, President George H.W. Bush, and President Clinton, of course, and President Bush the Jr. Now you may know the Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance, was also from Yale Law School. I was class of 1993. He was class of 2013. I was 20 years ahead of J.D. Vance. And if things go right, J.D. Vance actually may or may not, you never know, be the next President of the United States. Therefore, from my perspective, from China, being a Chinese, lots of experience in the United States, being licensed as a lawyer in the state of New York, and with Mr. Taft being my alumni and the first governor of the Philippines, it truly gives me very extraordinary perspective when I look at the Philippines. And I consider everyone here in this very distinguished audience as my friends. And allow me to mention one point before I start my presentation. I truly believe China and the Philippines, for thousands of years, we got along with each other very well, without war, without conflict, without confrontation. And let me share with you what my firm belief. I believe for many thousands of years to come in the future, I'm convinced China and the Philippines will remain close neighbors and very good friends. Now, we are living in the present. At present, there are some ups and downs in our bilateral relations, of course. We need to deal with these tensions which, if left unattended, may actually flare up into major crisis, which will not be good for China or for the Philippines. But I truly believe, being the two very close neighbors just across a body of water, it gives all the incentives to the Chinese people and the Filipino people to deal with each other as equal and to be very constructive in our relations with each other. Allow me to start my presentation. I first came to the Philippines back in 1993 when I was a lawyer in the Wall Street working for a distinguished American law firm. Now, I came here to work on the convertible bond issue by Robinson Department Store. I worked as a lawyer, later I worked as a banker with Morgan Stanley, and we had very good business in the Philippines. Now, back in 1993 and 1994, let me tell you the real truth. The Philippines, or at least Manila, which I visited at that time, was much more advanced and much more developed than most of China. At that time, the Philippines was considered one of the most developed countries in this part of Asia, one of the leading nations in the ASEAN framework, whatever it was called at that time, and a country with great expectation and with great aspirations. And at that time, if I remember correctly, China was very poor, very not developed. But if we fast forward to today, 2025, China is already the largest economy. If we use purchasing power parity, China is about 135% that of the United States. In terms of the official exchange rate, China is next only to the United States. My belief is that in another 5 to 10 years, the size of the Chinese economy, if we still use official exchange rate, will be larger than the United States. And if you believe in Elon Musk, he keeps saying by the middle of this century, China will be about twice the size of the US economy. So we are living in a fast-changing world. We can compare China and the Philippines back in 1993, 1995. We can compare China and the Philippines today. We can compare China versus the United States today in terms of purchasing power parity or official exchange rate. But we can also look forward into the future. Let's say by 2050, just imagine for the Filipinos, you always have very strong relations with the United States for whatever reason, ever since 1898. And then the United States by 2050 will remain one of the most important and consequential countries in the world. But then, just across a body of water, you have China as one of your biggest neighboring country, twice as big as the United States in terms of the size of the economy. So, my idea and my contribution to my friends in the Philippines is to be friendly with the United States and be friendly with China. It will be suicidal if we want to be friends with one and an enemy with the other, because that's not going to help the fundamental interest of the Philippines. Be friends with both China and the United States probably will be the best strategy for the Philippines. Now, another point I want to share with you. I traveled to more than 100 countries in the world, and I truly believe Philippines is one of the countries which has all the natural endowments and the geographical location which will make the people in the Philippines one of the wealthiest nations in the world. Look at the country, look at your geopolitical position, look at the fact that you are just a body of water away from China, a body of water a little bit further from Japan, and across the Pacific Ocean from the United States, you should be in the hub of everything going from east to west, from north to south. What is missing, according to my observation, is what China has been doing ever since 1978. Let me share with you. Just now, one of you mentioned I worked for Deng Xiaoping as his interpreter. Yes, I worked for Deng Xiaoping for more than 20 of his very important meetings with foreign visiting dignitaries. Now, Deng Xiaoping told us to focus only on several things. One is to maintain domestic stability at any cost. If you do not have domestic stability, you cannot develop. And look at the Philippines. You need to maintain your domestic stability, of course. Then the second point, equally, if not more importantly, keeping peace in the world. It doesn't mean that China can dictate peace to many countries in the world, but it means that China wants to avoid getting involved in any war with anyone in the world. Because without peace, you cannot have domestic stability. And without peace and without stability, you cannot get your economy developed. Then the third point is even more important. Let me share with you this open secret. Deng Xiaoping always said, development is the hard truth. Now, we believe in development since 1978 as the hard truth which guides everything we do. Forget about pure politics. Forget about geopolitics, for example. Forget about many other things. Just keep focused on development. When I travel in the Philippines, I always remind myself, if I have a chance to tell my Filipino friends, and if I can only say one thing, that is, development is the hard truth. If you do not develop, no one will wait for you. You will be left behind. Just look at other ASEAN member states. Laos has built railway connection. Indonesia has built fast rail tracks linking from Bandung to Jakarta, and they are expanding that to the east and to the west. Look at Thailand. They are building railway connections. Look at Vietnam. They are connecting their northern border with China all the way to Cambodia. Look at so many other countries. They are building, they are connecting, they are building up their connectivity. And if we look at the Philippines, one thing which really pains me is that Filipino people deserve to develop and deserve to treat development as the hard truth, as we do. We in China even today still believe development is the hard truth. Of course, back 46 years ago, we talked about modernization of our agriculture, industry, national defense, and science and technology. Now, back in China, we talk about kind of tongue twister. We call it new qualitative productivity, meaning everything using science and technological breakthrough need to guide whatever we do as an economy. And in this regard, let me share with you, AI becomes more and more important. Now, you know, back in January, out of Hangzhou in China, there was a major breakthrough. It's called the DeepSeek. I published an op-ed after the DeepSeek event. I mentioned 2 points. Allow me to share with you. One is that AI does not mean American intelligence. Really, I really mean it. It's not rocket science. AI does not mean American intelligence. AI means artificial intelligence for the benefit of all, developed by all, and participated by all countries involved. But if any one country wants to build up AI dominance, do you know what will be the consequence? No one should allow any country to build up AI dominance. And I always tell my friends in the United States, including many from Yale University or from Yale Law School, don't build up American AI dominance as if AI is American intelligence. Because if any one country achieves dominance in AI, holy cow, it will dominate the world. It will destroy this polarity in the world of today. You may say, Victor Gao, polarity in the world? No, there is one country which has unipolarity in the world. But you are wrong, you are absolutely wrong. Because this year, we are celebrating the 80th year anniversary of the founding of the United Nations back in 1945. Do you know the world order established back in 1945 after the unconditional surrender of Nazi Germany and the unconditional surrender of Japanese fascism was actually multipolar in its nature. Just look at the United Nations Security Council with 5 permanent member states: China, the United States, former Soviet Union, now Russia, the United Kingdom, and France, each with a veto power. Meaning, these 5 permanent member states check and balance each other, preventing any one country from achieving dominance. Why? Do you know why? You need to ask why. Because the rule of thumb is that if any one single country achieves dominance of the world, it may enslave all the other countries, it may hold a gun at your head, it may issue ultimatum to you, it may force you to kowtow, kneel down. It may actually go back to the rule of the jungle rather than rule of civilization. So we are living in a fast-changing world. I believe this so-called reciprocal tariff war demonstrates that no country should be allowed to achieve dominance of the world. Now, ever since April the 2nd, I've been interviewed on multiple occasions, and I've declared in my own humble capacity that the tariff war launched by the United States is the wrong war, and the United States government is holding a gun at everyone's head. For example, I proclaimed that this is the wrong war, but so many countries basically could not resist the maximum pressure from the United States until one appeals court in the United States, through its ruling, declared most of the elements of the global reciprocal tariff war launched by the United States are illegal and even unconstitutional in the United States. Of course, that forces the Trump administration to rush the case to the Supreme Court of the United States, and the United States has decided to do an urgent review of the situation. They've scheduled sometime in October next month to review this very, very extraordinary case, whereby the appeals court in the United States ruled against the government of the United States, declaring the tariff war as illegal and unconstitutional. So I think we need to wait until the final ruling of the Supreme Court of the United States, and whatever decision of the Supreme Court, I think we all need to do the right thing. That is, to protect free trade. I hope China will protect free trade. The Philippines will also protect free trade. All the ASEAN 10 countries will protect free trade, because free trade deserves to be protected. Without free trade, and free trade includes free trade in goods as well as free trades in services, the Philippines earns a lot of income through free trade in services. So in that sense, we are all in the same boat. We all need to rise up and defend free trade, either free trade in goods or free trade in services. Now, we are also living in a world in the sense that we are at a threshold of peace versus war. Now you see so many wars, in Ukraine, between Russia and Ukraine, and whoever that is behind Ukraine, sometimes you say, well, the United States was behind the Ukraine. And now President Trump said, if I were president of the United States back in 2022, the war would never have happened. And President Putin in Alaska on August the 18th, also declared that if His Excellency President Trump were the President of the United States in 2022, the war in Ukraine would never have happened. So, what exactly is the problem with the war in Ukraine? The war in Gaza. So many people killed. More than 70 million innocent people, civilians, were killed. 3/4 of them, men and women and children, for example. It's horrific. And we have other wars against Iran, and amazingly, war between India and Pakistan, for example, involving one of the largest scale aerial battle, probably since Vietnam War. And in the middle of all this, the Ambassador Huang from China also mentioned just now, on September the 2nd, there was big celebration in Beijing, attended by about 27 heads of states and heads of government from so many other countries, and many other deputy prime minister, ministers of all kinds, foreign ministers from more than 180 countries in the world were all gathered in Tiananmen Square to celebrate what? Two things. One was the 80th year anniversary of the victory of the Chinese people's war of resistance against Japanese aggression. And the second was the 80th anniversary of world's anti-fascism war. Both ended in August and September 1945. So, we are living in the world today, and the world order we are living in through was not established today, was not established yesterday. It was not established after the end of the Cold War in 1991. It was, allow me to mention, established back in 1945 when Japanese fascism was defeated, when Nazi Germany was defeated. Now, in this context, allow me to mention one point. China made the greatest sacrifice, and we did most of the heavy lifting to defeat fascism. Why? Because for the United States, the war against Japan was less than 4 years. For China, the war of resistance against Japanese aggression started in 1931, and it lasted 14 years. At the height of the Japanese occupation, Japan occupied about half of the Chinese landmass, and they closed off almost all the Chinese coastline. Japan wanted to defeat China. Japan wanted to wipe out the Chinese culture, wipe out the Chinese civilization. They claimed that the Japanese nation was the finest example of the civilization in our part of the world. This actually forced everyone in China to rise up to commit to defeating the Japanese aggressors. Let me share with you, the Second World War was not the Second European War. I was shocked to hear some European leaders pretending that they are shocked that China said China made a lot of contribution to defeating fascism. Let me tell that lady in Brussels, don't be shocked. Without China fighting against Japanese aggression for 14 years in a row, sacrificing more than 35 million people, my nationals, the Chinese nationals, let me tell you, Japan and Nazi Germany may actually pool their resources and attack Soviet Union and really establish their gridlock on the Eurasian continent. And if Japan completely defeated China, or if China really surrendered as, pardon me, I hope there is no Frenchman here, as France did in the Second World War, you know, at the height of the Japanese aggression, they had more than 4 million Japanese soldiers occupying China. If Japan forced China to surrender, Japan would be able to reallocate all their soldiers from the China theater to fight against the Americans in the Pacific theater. I think we will be living in a completely different world. And in this sense, allow me to mention, after Pearl Harbor, the Philippines was subjugated to Japanese occupation for about 4 years. So in that sense, the Chinese people and the Filipino people, we should be allies together because we suffer the same scourge and we fought against the same fascist regime in Tokyo. Now, in the world of today, you also hear lots of people talk about destined for war, implying that between China and the United States, these two countries are destined for war. And that theory, the Thucydides trap theory, was proposed by one very eminent professor from Harvard. Fortunately, he's not from Yale. Otherwise, I probably would not say what I'm going to say. He said, based on his analysis of cases of war, he came up with a theory of Thucydides trap, implying China and the United States are destined to fight a war against each other. Now, I felt uncomfortable with his theory from very beginning, not because he was from Harvard, I went to Yale. I thought something must be wrong in his theory. And now, standing here in Manila, in front of all the distinguished excellencies, let me tell you, I now call that theory, destined for war theory, applied to China and the United States, as a fallacy. Why? Why do I call it as a fallacy? Because he analyzed all the cases of war which were conventional wars, and he wanted to apply his theory to China and the United States, two very important conventional powers, of course, but also two very important nuclear weapon countries. I remember what I learned from Yale PhD program. Between nuclear power states, you never fight a war. Because if you fight a war, you will have MAD, mutually assured destruction. So anyone trying to instigate a war between China and the United States may force mankind to stare into Armageddon right away. That leaves me to my theory. Allow me to share with you. I called it inevitability of peace between China and the United States. You know, whether the United States like China or not, that's another thing. But China and the United States eventually will need to live in peace. Whatever problems they have, they need to resolve them in peace, in negotiation, in diplomacy. That's why, if you have not watched the Victory Day parade in Beijing on September the 3rd, one of the weapons China demonstrated is a missile with all the warheads. We call it 61 because it can contain 60 nuclear warheads plus one hydrogen bomb. Now, in the world of today, let me tell you, which country has hydrogen bomb? China is the only country with hydrogen bomb. And that ICBM can cover every corner of the world in less than 20 minutes and destroy any target in any corner of the world without any possibility of being intercepted. I hope Washington has learned the lesson. They know, as I declared in my interview with Abrams of the United States, very distinguished American, I basically told him, if you want to have war, you will get war. If you want to destroy China, you will be destroyed. If you want to impose nuclear war on China, you will be wiped out by nuclear war. This is very serious. China's policy is very clear. China will not fire the first shot, but China will not allow you to fire the second shot. That's why, while I'm pained to see the confrontation between China and the Philippines in the South China Sea, I also feel blessed that they are only using water cannons against each other. Make no mistake, China has more lethal things than water cannons. But I hope we will only use water cannon and we will not escalate and we will never use real ammunition between China and the Philippines. Now, Mr. Abrams also challenged me, saying that China's military buildup is a challenge, a threat to our neighboring countries. I told him point blank, No country in China's neighborhood is a match against China in terms of military power. China's military buildup is a matchup against only one country, that is the United States. China will never allow the United States to launch a war against China, conventional or nuclear, without suffering devastating consequences. Now, I mention this with one purpose. I hope people in China and people here in the Philippines will look at ourselves and each other as friends rather than as enemies. I don't believe there is any one single enemy in China against the Philippines. We all love Philippines. Everyone I know wants to come to Philippines as a tourist, for example, to taste your beautiful cuisine. And there are so many things of great interest, great attraction to the Philippines. And if the Philippines is really committed to treating development as the hard truth, to build up your connectivity, financial connectivity, technological connectivity, and also AI connectivity of all kinds, let me tell you, China is the best country for you to work with because China has the largest financial pool, China has the largest manufacturing capabilities, and China can really work with the Philippines completely as equal. We will not look down upon the Philippines. We will look at the Filipino people individually, as a nation, as a country, completely as equals. We will never hold a gun at anyone in the Philippines. That is the reality. Now, the United States is great in many other senses, of course, but do you really think the United States will come to the Philippines with money and with manufacturing contribution? They are really depleting their own manufacturing capabilities. Their shipbuilding is really a shadow of what it used to be, and they are now working with the Republic of Korea to make up for the deficiencies in the United States for their manufacturing deficiencies. Allow me also to mention, because whenever I come to the Philippines, many people in the Philippines talk about arbitration. I am an arbitrator in an arbitration tribunal. It's called Asian International Arbitration Tribunal, headquartered in Singapore. The story is too long. I do not want to go into details to avoid bothering you. But allow me just to make one point. Arbitration without consent is a violation of the rule of law. I say this as an alumni from Yale Law School. I say this as an attorney at law, licensed in the state of New York. I also say this as a Chinese national. I can bring you to court whether you agree it or not. But I will never be able to drag you into arbitration without your consent, because arbitration without consent is a violation of rule of law. So no one in the world should expect and indulge in the fantasy that you can drag one country. It's not a small country, not an inconsequential country. It's a big country. It's one of the countries which made the biggest contribution to defeating fascism in 1945 into arbitration without its consent. Come on, you don't want to do that. You do not want to violate the basic tenet of the rule of law. So I hope you will walk away from today's meeting believing, as I have always believed, arbitration without consent is a violation of the rule of law. We want to have rule of law, but we don't want to have arbitration without consent. And that is also a very important thing. I also want to mention one thing which you may consider that as controversial, because I mentioned President Taft, the first governor of the United States in the Philippines, and I kept reading the Spanish-American Treaty of 1898. Now, if you go to that treaty, in English as well as in Spanish, there is one very explicit clause saying the territory of the Philippines to be transferred by the Empire of Spain to the United States of America on the west side of the territory should not go beyond 118-degree longitude. That means that treaty, which is the birthright of the Philippines in the modern time, had its western border clearly defined, carved in stone in that Spanish-American Treaty of 1898. So I hope no one in the world should be pretending that they cannot read the Spanish-American Treaty of 1898. I read it many times, partially because I knew Governor Taft was very much involved in coming up with all the rules and the regulations for the Philippines after the takeover of the Philippines by the United States from Spain in 1898. So I think when we really talk about the realities in the world, we need to go back into history. And as far as the Philippines is concerned, from the Chinese perspective, I do not need to go all the way into antiquity, into 1,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago. No, we just need to go back to 1898. We just need to look at the fateful thing which happened in 1898 when Spain transferred the totality of the territory of the Philippines to the United States of America. And soon afterwards, Mr. Taft became the first governor of the United States of America in the Philippines. Now, I mention all this with only one purpose. That is, for me, Philippines is and will always be a friendly country for my motherland, and I will always urge for friendship between China and the Philippines. When we look at the title of our meeting today, Continuing Peace and Continuing Security, I thought one word was missing. That is sustainable development. Because we need peace and security for their own purposes, but without peace and security, we cannot develop. So I think between China and the Philippines, we need peace. We need security. We need to have the legitimate boundary of the Philippines protected legally, and we want to have sustainable development for the Philippines. I really dream that the Philippines will achieve as much development as China has been making since 1978, when Deng Xiaoping became the paramount leader of China. I'm writing a biography entitled Interpreting Deng Xiaoping. So next time, if you really want to understand what Deng Xiaoping was, what his implications are today, I'll be very happy to share with you. But one thing is for sure, without peace, neither China nor the Philippines can develop, and without development, the Chinese people will be unhappy, and the people here in the Philippines will not be happy, especially when you look at your neighboring country being on the fast track, developing by leaps and bounds. It is time for the Philippines to really wake up and treat development as your hard truth, as we in China treated development as our hard truth ever since 1978. I thank you very much for your patience. Long live the Philippines.